Okay, so we're going to take a look at the part of our expedition to Salem, Oregon for the total eclipse. So, Toronto Centre was well represented in Salem. Along with me, we had Charmaine, Brian and Janice, as well as David and Stella Louie. And it was Charmaine's first eclipse, as well as Stella's. David has been along with me on a couple of other trips, and Brian and Janice had been with me on a couple of trips but got clouded out. So for all of us, we were looking forward to seeing an eclipse in a clear sky this time. There were also some other Canadians in our group. Kim Brunhuber, who is the CBC News man in Los Angeles, was up in Salem, and he spent most of the eclipse with us at our observing site. Doug George and his wife Mercedes Pelayo from Ottawa were with us as well, and Doug set up his 6-inch refractor next to me on the patio where we were located. And then Paul and Carol Steinberg from Woodstock, Ontario joined us as well. We were at Willamette University. Let's try and get this to Willamette University's campus in downtown Salem. And this was arranged by a classic tourist collection agency, which is run by Mark Sood, who's been the travel agent for Jay Pasakoff for the last 20 or so years. Jay has been very fortunate in being able to get National Science Foundation and National Geographic Society funding for his expeditions through all this time. So he had about 20 or so graduate students and undergraduates, as well as a dozen astronomers from Greece who were along with him in Salem. And the rest of us, 360 eclipse chasers, were just along for the ride. And in Salem, there was an awful lot going on. The state capitol building is right next to the university campus. And as you can see here, they were busy passing out eclipse glasses, one per person in the days before the eclipse. There were warning signs about how to use your eclipse glasses, and of course all sorts of souvenirs available. And even the restaurants were offering things like eclipse themed drinks of all sorts. So it's quite interesting to see what was going on throughout Oregon State. The night before, we had a briefing which I helped with in just preparing people for the eclipse. Of those 360, well over half of them were first-time eclipse chasers. Oddly enough, a lot of them were retired astronomers who'd never seen an eclipse before. So we did a lot of outreach over those couple of days before the eclipse. And you can see our setup right here. There I am with my telescope, and then the rest of our group just sitting there waiting for the eclipse to happen, and then the Greek astronomers next to us walled off. And during the totality, they had a coelostat set up where they were actually able to pick up our footsteps, so we had to be very careful not to move during the eclipse, because otherwise we'd have ruined their observations. So that was something we had to watch out for in that site. Here's my own setup, an 80 millimeter f5 refractor, and I ended up having to drape this bag over the front end of the telescope to keep the whole thing from flipping because of the weight of the camera. And so I've got a weight suspended there to keep things going. It worked. As you can see, I actually did get some photographs. Although I'm discovering that, oddly enough, my eyes are not good enough to really get a good sharp focus anymore. I need to have somebody there to help me focus now. So anyway, these were reasonably good. Doug George generously allowed me to show his photographs. So here's a pre-eclipse shot of the sun through his solar filter, and then a short exposure and an extended exposure through his 6-inch refractor. So he got some very good images out of his setup. Brian did take some temperature readings, and this is a really weird one right here, an anomalous reading as he puts it, but you can see the drop in temperature in our station. Now, we were on a concrete patio, so that might have contributed to some of the temperature stability in the area, but it still showed a reasonable drop in temperature even then. And then, of course, at the end of the eclipse, there was a bit of a delay, and then it just zoomed back up. It was really quite hot where we were. Here's our contact times for the eclipse. So we ended up with a minute and about 52 or 53 seconds of totality at our location. So that was pretty close on to what had been predicted according to Eclipse Droid and a few other pieces of software we had with us. And here's our group celebrating at the end of totality. We had a couple of folks who were joining us. This lady is an astrophysicist from Israel, and she had been on the tour with Brian and Janice, and she joined us in the celebration. So there we are, say, yeah, we did see it finally. So there we are. It was interesting that this eclipse happens to be the same Saros cycle as my very first eclipse back in 1963. So 54 years later, and of the 4 eclipses in that Saros series that have occurred since my first eclipse, I've seen 3 of the 4. So that wasn't too bad. And you can see the banner here, which starts with our expedition in 1972 in Bonaventure, Quebec. And of all of these eclipse trips that have been done by the Toronto Centre, there's only 2 of them that I haven't been on, 83 and 84. The 84 and the 87, rather. Papua New Guinea and Gabon. So we've been pretty lucky with getting through things, and I've had 23 successful observations out of the 26 attempts at observing solar eclipses. So that's pretty much it for the Toronto Centre expedition. A success finally after a couple of years of cloudy weather, and I think on to 2019 in Chile.
Questions for Ralph?
Yeah.
Do you remember the settings that you used?
Let's see. The eclipse shots varied from a thousandth of a second to a 60th of a second for totality. The partials that I took were about a 4,000th of a second with that system that I had. It was very, very fast. I was looking for a telescope with a very wide field to try and get as much of the corona as possible. So that's the choice of scope I had. Any other questions? Yeah.
Why was the corona so tight, Ralph?
I think it's more or less just, it was a clear sky, and it was really a good observation. The problem was very, very high smoke particles. So I think there was a little bit of extinction. Now, Salem was not nearly as bad as, say, on the Columbia Plateau and points east, where they had the full bore of the forest fires from Washington, but we were still getting some smoke where we were. So I think that contributed to making it more difficult to get extended corona shots. Andrew?
Why Oregon? Because Oregon's got a lot of rain, doesn't it? I was surprised.
Well, the thing is that it was a clear sky, but we're looking at stuff that was very, very high up, way above what the clouds would have taken out with any kind of rain. But they hadn't had rain in a while either. So, this summer has been extremely dry throughout the Pacific Northwest. And certainly Washington had a lot of very bad forest fires. And we were lucky that where we were, we didn't see as much of that, but it still did affect things. One thing that was interesting was that I had been watching the weather as I arrived there, and the early predictions on the from the satellite observations, when they did the extrapolation for the 21st, one of the very first of those eclipse day cloud cover maps showed Salem and that area as being the only part of the track that would be clear that day. So we were looking at that and thinking, oh boy. So, you know, we were very lucky that everybody did see it except for those unlucky ones in the Mississippi Valley. So, Ron?
You mentioned science, was it Jay Pashkarov?
Pascal.
Okay. I think you wrote an article for Sky and Tell or maybe Astronomy on actual science that's going to be done, you know, attempted during the eclipse.
Yes, and
Was he happy with
they
the
were
results?
mostly successful. Pasakov's group did get some good observations, and he did show some of those the night of the eclipse at dinner. He already had it processed. But they were looking at magnetic field structure, and they did get some very good observations. So he was quite happy. That was his 65th or 66th solar eclipse. So, you know, I think he was reasonably happy. Yeah. Anybody else? I can't see anybody over here on the other side, so if you do have a question, please just call it out. If not, what happened in 84 and 87 was that I was too busy to go. But the other ones we did manage to get into those and see the eclipse more or less successfully. Although Cairns was a cloud out and we drowned in Pankalaban last year. So, you know, into every life a little rain must fall. It's unfortunately when it comes down in buckets. So. Yeah, this one's going to be filled once we get Salem in 2017 into that bottom right corner. So time for a new flag. This one's already had one extension, no more. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you, Paul.